Hello, I'm Paulie, and welcome to episode 3 of Digicam's Under 50 Quid. Now, this episode is going to be less of a retro review and more of like a full-blown vintage review, because the camera that I'm talking about this time came out when I was at the mere tender-old age of 4. And that is right, it is an old boy that we're talking about this time. Let's run the title and then we'll get into it. So we all know the Canon G7X and the G5X and the G1X and the G3X and all of the banging little G cameras that Canon's been putting out in recent years, yeah? But where did it all start? Well, as it turns out, it all started many moons ago in a glorious little year called the Y2K, with a camera appropriately called the Canon G1. So, as we've learned, the G1 was released in the year 2000 and is essentially the grandparent of all the current G cameras from Canon. It's got a 1x1.8 inch CCD sensor with a somewhat sorry sounding 3.3 megapixels. It's got a variety of shooting modes ranging from full auto all the way to fully manual. It's got a lens with 3x optical zoom with 35mm equivalents ranging from 34mm to 102mm. At its widest, the aperture opens up all the way to f2, and that only jumps to f2.5 in more telephoto focal lengths. The ISO ranges from 50 to 400, but in auto mode, it'll only use 50 or 100 because 2 and 400 produce like a barrage of grain. It shoots JPEGs with various options for size and compression, as you would expect, but the crazy folks at Canon decided it should also shoot RAW, which is super neat. It's got a fully flip-out 1.8 inch LCD screen. It's got a built-in flash, but also has a sync terminal so you can swap in a speed light should you need something a bit more powerful. It's also got manual focusing mode, which you'll get into in a bit more detail later. It uses the easy to acquire BP511 rechargeable battery. That was really good because when I got the camera the battery wasn't holding any charge whatsoever, but after a brief look online I managed to get myself 2 batteries and a charger for I think I paid like 20 quid, which is like, yeah, dead easy. And another super useful thing is that it will store all the images you take on a relievingly common method, which is the compact flash card. Now, when I first ordered this camera, I'd only seen pictures of it against like plain backdrops, right? So it was just like, you know, plain backdrops on the eBay auction. You look it up on Google, it's just like against like a white background where they've cut it out or whatever. Cool, so looking at the pictures of it, I just sort of assumed what the size would be, and I thought that it was going to be the same size as like an Olympus Mu, which is about this size, right? It's like a 35mm compact, it's nice and easy, like fits in the hand pretty good, you can stick it in your pocket, no problem. I never read that it was this size, but from looking at the pictures I just assumed that it would be. So I nearly choked on my tea when I opened the box and was greeted with this monster. Look at this, it's absolutely huge. Where's the focus point here? So if I hold these in front of my face, you'll be able to see the size difference. And like, this is a big camera. I'm going to show you some comparison shots now. So this is it next to the Canon from the first video, and this is it next to my Sony A7R II. The camera is one hefty boy to say the least. But aside from the size, the button layout is mostly good. You've got a dial on the top for selecting your shooting modes. You've got a D-pad on the back for navigating menus, and then just like various buttons around to access different functions and the like. The only thing that consistently caught me off guard was the fact that to get to playback mode, like to look at the photos that you've taken, you have to sort of switch it. You can see on the top here, I'll do a close-up now. But on the top you can see that you have to switch it from being on and then go past off over to playback mode, and that caught me out so many times. Like I'd be, you know, shooting and looking for the button and then was like, oh yeah, it's at the top, and then I'd be looking at the images in playback, I'd be half pressing the shutter to try and get back to shooting mode and was like, why isn't it doing anything? It's like, oh yeah, it's at the top, and I've got to like switch it all the way back round as well. But yeah, no, apart from that, layout is all good. The screen is not great, but I'm not mad about it because, let's face it, this camera is 22 years old at this point, and I know that Canon were doing their best at the time, so yeah, that's all good. That does mean though that the manual focus function that we've got on here is essentially redundant, because when you're on it, it doesn't show you the focal depths? Focal length, no, focal, focal length? Yeah. That does make the manual focus function pretty much redundant though, because when you're using it, the screen doesn't display any sort of focal length. It doesn't show you the distance at which you're focusing. You've just got sort of a white bar that increases gradually the more you focus away from the camera. But using the screen to try and actually gauge whether your subject is in focus is pretty much impossible, because anything that where it's like slightly out of focus to in focus to then slightly out of focus the other way, it all looks exactly the same on the screen. So it was neat that they put the manual focus thing on, but like you can't use it. The grip on it is essentially non-existent. We've just got like a strip of rubber here, and you can see the edge of the camera is like really slightly raised. But you know, I never dropped it. I've been taking portrait shots with it as well. I think as long as you can grip your handle right, then it's not going anywhere. If you do have a problem with gripping things with your hand, I would definitely recommend a wrist strap. If not, I would recommend probably a later model, because I know that the grip did get chunkier on the later models. The general construction of the camera feels really good. It is plastic, but it's solid, and it's got like a good weight to it as well. It definitely feels like it's entirely packed out, and the plastic doesn't feel brittle. It doesn't feel, like I said, it doesn't feel hollow. It feels like you could probably drop this a good few times before any sort of damage happens, so that's definitely a plus. I just want to finish off the first impressions bit with a little creak test like we did on the Sony, so let's give that a go. Nothing. This thing is solid. It's not going anywhere. We are all good to go. Right, so now the creak test done, let's talk about how I actually found using it. So if I'm being honest, I did struggle a little bit with this camera. It's definitely partially my own fault. I've spent the last month shooting with ultra compacts on like exclusively either full auto or program mode, but with my own fault acknowledged, there are definitely some limitations with this camera. I'll get into that now. The promise of f2 is not all that easy to achieve. Basically, the shutter speed caps off at 1/640th of a second if you're shooting on anything under f8. And that means that when you're shooting in daylight, you basically just can't use f2 because the shutter speeds just aren't going fast enough to be able to expose it correctly. So all of your images are going to be like super blown out. Low light was a bit of a struggle too. As I mentioned earlier, your only real viable ISO options are 50 or 100. If you use 2 or 400, it's just like pure grain. And even shooting on the elusive f2.0, you still end up having to use shutter speeds that are just like too slow for handheld, or you've got to shoot with the flash, but the flash is like crazy bright, and as far as I can tell, you can't adjust how bright the flash is on this. If you had an external flash, then I'm sure that you could, but even then it's not exactly, you know, the most subtle choice, especially if you're doing street photography. Now, I am aware that there is a sweet spot in between the two scenarios. You know, you've got bright daylight and then you've got low light, like indoors in a dark place or night. But the only time I think I really found the sweet spot was when I was shooting Borough Market. I've got like one shot where everything just sort of came together, and it's just a guy sipping his coffee in Borough Market. I'll flash that up on the screen now actually so you can see. Just a couple more negatives that I want to squeeze in quickly is that there is shutter lag, and the autofocus, as expected, it likes to take its sweet time to get the job done, and when it has got the job done, quite often it has done the job wrong, and you won't be able to tell because it will be close but not quite right. And on the screen everything looks perfect, but as soon as you import it into the computer, you're realizing that a lot of your photos are not sharp. But like, you know, we all knew that was going to be the case. Right, now, with all that being said, this thing is still an absolute joy to use. Trying to get the shot feels more like a fun challenge than some sort of technical slog. The camera's 22 years old, and you're aware of that every second that you're using it, but in a really good way. I'll touch on this more when I go over to the Paulie rating, but for now, we're going to jump to the shoot diary in just a second. Before we do, I just want to say that all of the pictures that you're going to see have been edited, although I think what I'm going to do is put a Google Drive link down in the description, with like a select few pictures of the ones that you're going to see on here. So if you do want to see before edits how the pictures look straight out the camera, I'll have a few of them in the description below. So yeah, let's jump into the shoot diary. How's it looking? It could be like way too bright. What setting did it?
It's quite bright, but it looks quite good actually.
Have you ever looked? Right, the Paulie rating. This thing definitely has its downfalls, but we all knew that was going to be the case, being that it is a 3.3 megapixel lump from 22 years ago. Trying to compare this camera to modern cameras feels like a total waste of time, to be honest. And that is because you're not going to be using this camera to try and get the best picture in the world. You're using this camera to try and wield ancient tech in a way that like gets its own special results, you know? And that's why it's so fun. Sure, it's clunky, it's slow, it's massive, and in real life it would be a much better decision to sort of reach over this camera and just grab my A7 and take that out shooting. But if you want to switch things up and challenge yourself and just sort of have fun coming at everything from like a different angle, like figuratively and literally, then for 30 great British bucks this thing can definitely provide everything you need to do that. And for that reason I'm giving this thing a Paulie rating of 8 out of 10. Although I mean it should really be on a different board to the other cameras because it's a different game entirely. But it's getting an 8 out of 10. I've decided it. There it is. At the time it came out, this was Canon's way of proving that they were the best of the best, and it's still capable enough today that it's like an excellent little camera to take out and have a load of fun with. Now, before we move on, I feel obliged to say that I didn't just buy the G1. I also have the G5 and the G6 in my possession. So if you want to see me make videos on those, make sure you subscribe because they're going to be coming in the future. I've also got a couple other videos up on my YouTube already of me doing this format of review for some ultra compact cameras. So if you want to check those out, they'll be there. And with that, I'm going to cut to the sample videos from this thing now. So you won't see me again after. And yeah, hope you like this. Goodbye.
Right.